4.7%. That's Linux's share of the global desktop market in 2025, up from just 1.5% in 2020. Over 6 million people switched away from Windows last year alone, and most of them aren't going back. If you're still on Windows 11, watching Microsoft take screenshots of your screen every few seconds, requiring hardware upgrades just to meet arbitrary security standards, and forcing updates that restart your machine during work hours, you've probably asked yourself the same question everyone else is asking: is it finally time to leave? Here's what most people don't know. Switching to Linux isn't hard anymore. The real problem is picking the wrong distribution and giving up 3 days later when your printer doesn't work or your NVIDIA drivers break. There are over 1,000 Linux distributions out there, but only 3 are actually worth your time if you're coming from Windows. This video will show you exactly which one fits your situation, what each one does better than the others, and how to avoid the mistakes that send people back to Windows within a week. By the end, you'll know whether you should switch, and if you do, you won't waste time on the wrong choice. For now, let's focus on your escape routes. The 3 distributions that matter are Linux Mint, Ubuntu, and Zorin OS. Not Arch Linux that requires a computer science degree to install. Not the dozens of niche distributions that break after one kernel update. And these 3 are built specifically for people leaving Windows. They maintain massive hardware compatibility databases, and they have support communities large enough that your exact problem has already been solved and documented. Here's the critical detail most comparison videos miss, and these aren't 3 versions of the same thing with different wallpapers. They're fundamentally different tools designed for different types of users. Choosing based on which one has the prettiest screenshots is how you end up frustrated and back on Windows within a month. What makes these 3 different? They're all built on Ubuntu's long-term support foundation, giving them access to the largest software repository in the Linux world, and ensuring your hardware will work without hunting down obscure driver packages. They all receive security updates for years. They all have graphical installers that don't require touching a command line, and they're all backed by either large communities or actual companies, which means they won't disappear. Here's what none of them do. They don't collect telemetry unless you explicitly opt in. They don't require online accounts to use your computer. They don't force reboots in the middle of your workday. They don't install applications you didn't ask for. Your files stay on your device. Your operating system works for you, not for a corporation's advertising platform. Linux Mint is the distribution for people who want Windows without Microsoft, not a reimagined operating system with experimental interfaces. Windows 7, specifically, the last version that felt stable before Microsoft started treating your desktop like a mobile device. The Cinnamon desktop environment that ships with Mint looks almost identical to Windows 7. Panel at the bottom, Start menu in the corner, System tray on the right. You can sit down at a Linux Mint desktop and start working immediately without learning new patterns. The Mint development team moves slowly on purpose. They wait for Ubuntu to release their long-term support version every 2 years, then build Mint on top of that proven foundation, then test extensively before pushing anything to users. Right? You're not getting experimental features on day 1. What you are getting is a system that will not break. Your workflow tomorrow will be identical to your workflow today. Mint ships with software most Windows users need already installed. LibreOffice for documents, Firefox for browsing, Thunderbird for email, a media player that handles every video format, a file manager that works exactly like Windows Explorer. Everything you need is ready the moment installation finishes. For hardware compatibility, Mint excels with older machines. That laptop from 2012 that Windows 11 rejected because it doesn't have TPM 2.0, Mint will run faster on it than Windows 7 ever did. It uses minimal RAM and includes proper SSD optimization. And the trade-off is that Mint is conservative with new technologies. Wayland Display Server? Mint still defaults to the older X11 system because it's more stable. This is the distribution for someone who wants their computer to be a reliable tool, not a technology showcase. Ubuntu is the distribution for people who need their desktop to match their professional environment. This is the most widely deployed Linux distribution in the world, which translates into practical advantages. If your job involves cloud infrastructure or server management, you're already using Ubuntu, whether you realize it or not. 70% of cloud instances run Ubuntu. Most Docker images are built on Ubuntu-based layers. Choosing Ubuntu for your desktop means your local environment matches your production environment. But Ubuntu isn't just for developers. It's also the distribution with the best support for applications that haven't been fully ported to Linux. Zoom, Slack, Microsoft Teams, Spotify, Discord all optimized for Ubuntu first. Steam's Proton compatibility layer, developed and tested on Ubuntu. If commercial software has a Linux version, it probably targets Ubuntu. The GNOME desktop that ships with Ubuntu looks nothing like Windows. The interface is designed around workspaces and activities rather than a traditional taskbar. Applications launch from a grid overlay. Some people love this modern approach once they adjust. Others find it frustrating. The good news is that Ubuntu's popularity has spawned dozens of official variants. Kubuntu uses KDE Plasma, which looks similar to Windows 10. Ubuntu Mate uses a traditional desktop layout. Ubuntu uses lightweight XFCE for older hardware. You get Ubuntu's stability with your choice of interface. What sets Ubuntu apart is institutional support. Canonical, the company behind Ubuntu, offers professional support contracts. They maintain security updates for 10 years on LTS releases. They ensure compliance with regulations like GDPR and HIPAA. This isn't a community hobby project. This is an operating system backed by a profitable company with paying enterprise customers. The trade-off is that Canonical pushes Snap packages, their proprietary application format, even though many users prefer traditional packages because they load faster, and this frustrates purists but doesn't affect most users in practice. Zorin OS is the distribution designed specifically for the Windows 11 refugee who wants the smoothest transition possible, a system explicitly built to minimize the psychological friction of switching operating systems. The Zorin Appearance application is the feature that justifies this distribution's existence. With a single click, you can completely restructure your desktop to mimic Windows 11, Windows 10, Windows 7, or Mac OS. This isn't just changing wallpapers. This moves panels, restructures menus, and reorganizes system trays to match the layout you're switching from. Your brain doesn't have to relearn spatial locations for every action. Zorin includes Windows application support pre-configured through wine and bottles. Download a Windows executable, and many will run directly without manual configuration. This isn't perfect. Complex applications won't work, but for business utilities and productivity tools, it eliminates the immediate panic of what to do with programs you still need. The Pro version costs $48 as a one-time purchase and unlocks additional desktop layouts. But the free Core Edition is fully functional. The Lite Edition uses XFCE and runs exceptionally well on hardware from the early 2010s, making it ideal for reviving machines that Windows 11 rejected. Where Zorin excels is polish and attention to detail. This is a distribution built by a company, and it shows an interface consistency. Icons match across applications. Animations are smooth. The installer uses clear language. For someone who has never touched Linux, Zorin removes almost all barriers. The trade-off is development pace. Because Zorin is built by a small team, major releases come every 1 to 2 years. The forums are smaller than Ubuntu or Mint, which means less community documentation. Software compatibility is excellent because it's Ubuntu-based, but occasionally you'll encounter minor quirks. So which one should you choose? Choose Linux Mint if you want the path of least resistance and value stability above everything else. If you have hardware from 2010 to 2020 that you want to keep using, if you value predictability and never want your system to surprise you, if you just want Windows 7 back without Microsoft, Mint gets out of your way and lets you work. Choose Ubuntu if maximum compatibility and long-term support matter more than interface familiarity. If you're a developer or work with cloud infrastructure, if you need commercial applications, if you want corporate backing and decade-long security updates, if you're willing to spend a few days learning a different desktop paradigm in exchange for never worrying about whether software will work, Ubuntu won't limit you 5 years from now. Choose Zorin OS if you're genuinely intimidated by switching to Linux and need the most hand-holding possible. If you need to occasionally run Windows applications. If you value visual polish. If you're setting up computers for family members who aren't technical. If the learning curve is your biggest concern, Zorin holds your hand through the entire transition. Here's what nobody tells you about actually making this switch. You can try all 3 right now without installing anything. Every one of these distributions supports Lifeboot from a USB stick. Download the ISO file. Use Balena Etcher or Rufus to write it to a USB drive. Boot your computer from that drive. You're now running a full Linux desktop without installing anything. Test your printer, test your Wi-Fi. This eliminates guessing. When you're ready to install, all 3 offer simple dual boot setup that detects Windows automatically. You don't have to delete Windows. Every time you start your computer, you'll see a menu letting you choose which operating system to boot. Most people keep dual boot for 3 to 6 months, then eventually delete Windows once they realize they haven't booted it in weeks. Back up your important files before installation. Not because Linux is dangerous, but because you should always have backups before major system changes. The hardest part of switching to Linux isn't installation or learning the interface. It's breaking the mental habits Windows has trained into you over decades. You'll reach for keyboard shortcuts that don't exist. You'll expect certain menus that work differently. This is completely normal. Give yourself 2 full weeks of daily use before deciding whether it works for you. That's how long it takes for new patterns to become automatic. The common mistakes that send people back to Windows are all avoidable. Don't try to make Linux look exactly like Windows in every detail. Don't install software by downloading random packages from websites instead of using the Software Center. Don't ignore system updates for months. Don't expect every Windows application to have an identical Linux replacement. Learn the Linux equivalents. The tools are often better once you get past the familiarity barrier. For productivity, LibreOffice handles Microsoft Office formats better than you expect. Google Workspace works identically in a browser. For creative work, GIMP replaces Photoshop for most tasks. Inkscape handles vector graphics. DaVinci Resolve handles video editing. For development, Linux is superior to Windows with better terminal environments. For gaming, Steam's Proton layer runs most games, though some multiplayer titles with aggressive anti-cheat don't work. Windows 11 has made calculated decisions that prioritize Microsoft's business interests over user control. Mandatory telemetry. Hardware requirements designed to force upgrades, force reboots. These aren't bugs. These are intentional design choices that serve Microsoft's data collection business model. Linux distributions like Mint, Ubuntu, and Zorin represent a different philosophy. Your computer works for you. Your operating system doesn't fight you. Updates happen when you choose. Your data stays local. You're not the product being monetized. Here's your next step. Pick one of these 3 distributions. Linux Mint if you want. Familiar and stable. Ubuntu if you want compatible and supported. Zorin OS if you want easy and polished. Download the ISO. Create a bootable USB drive. Spend 1 hour in the live environment testing everything that matters to your workflow. If it feels right, install it as dual boot and commit to 2 weeks of actual daily use. Track what works and what doesn't during those 2 weeks. Join the forums for your chosen distribution. The communities are genuinely helpful. Ask questions, learn the tools. Most people who make it past the 2-week mark never go back. You don't have to accept Microsoft's vision of computing just because it's the default. These 3 distributions prove that stable, usable, privacy-respecting operating systems exist and are ready for everyday use. The barrier isn't technical anymore. It's just deciding you're willing to spend a weekend learning something new. Your computer should work for you, not spy on you. That's how technology is supposed to function.